Good evening, everyone. Bershut, Harav Aharon Lichtenstein and Dr. Tovah Lichtenstein, Rabbi Yehuda Seif, everyone who's come here, all the alumni. I would like to recognize the foundation's president, Dottie Berman, who's also here with us. I want to thank, of course, thank Shirley Schuster and Jeremy Schwartzbaum, my colleagues, for helping put this together. I want to thank all of the committee members. There are too many of them to list every single one of them, but really, Yasher Koach, there's a fantastic turnout with everything that's going on, and we obviously very much appreciate it. Rabbi Yehuda Seif, I want to thank for putting the program together and gathering and soliciting the questions, which we'll get into in a moment.
They're great questions.
Great. We also have a hechsher already for the questions.
I didn't say it was a hechsher, I just said they were great questions.
But most importantly, of course, to thank Rav Lichtenstein and Dr. Lichtenstein, who mamish came in this morning and have been busy with Chag HaSmicha and seeing family. They left Motzei Shabbos and felt it was important enough to come to this program tonight. So obviously, we want to take advantage of this special opportunity. Over the last over a year plus, since the 40th anniversary of the yeshiva, we've been making an emphasis of connecting and reconnecting with Bogrim in Israel, across the states, and we wanted to do something special for the years of the Machzorim from the 90s, and really felt this was an opportunity to take advantage during this trip and hear things in a way we haven't heard before, in a more intimate and personal, formal but comfortable venue, and something a little different, so I hope you enjoy. I really feel that Rav Lichtenstein is a man who needs no introduction. Everybody knows Rav Lichtenstein as our Rosh Yeshiva, and everyone here has spent time at the yeshiva for several years or a year. I just wanted to quickly just talk about Dr. Lichtenstein, who for me is a tremendous benefit and an added value working with the yeshiva.
He discovered me.
What?
He discovered
I discovered, yes. And as Jackie Mason has once said when he does these volunteer groups, that he doesn't make any money off of it. So Dr. Lichtenstein is doing this all volunteer, so I really appreciate her time. Just to give you some background on Dr. Lichtenstein.
First of all, my name is Tovah. That's all I say, okay?
Okay, Dr. Tovah Lichtenstein. Together with his wife, Rav Lichtenstein, together with his wife, Dr. Tovah Lichtenstein, also known as Tovah, made Aliyah with her family in 1971 to Yerushalayim. They have 6 wonderful and inspirational children, which is also a treat for me to work with.
We also have a lot of grandchildren.
A lot of grandchildren.
Hurricane yearbook.
I think almost more than the event committee as well, so I can't list them all. So Dr. Lichtenstein holds a PhD from Bar-Ilan University in social work with an expertise in child welfare. She's a senior lecturer at Bar-Ilan Universities for over 20 years and currently serves as the chairman of the advisory committee to the Minister of Social Welfare and the Minister of Justice of International Adoption in Israel. Rabbi Yehuda Seif had spent time at yeshiva in 95, 96, came back to the Kollel in 97. He was then with his wife in 2000, if I'm not mistaken, in the Kollel as well with Orit, who's with us this evening. He is currently a senior officer, a program officer at the Tikva Foundation in Manhattan, and was formerly the campus rabbi at Penn University through the JLI. So on that note, I would like to pass it over to Rabbi Yehuda Seif to begin the program. Just briefly, I want to explain to you that the solicited questions that Rabbi Seif had asked, that Rabbi Seif had solicited from people that are here this evening, and together with himself has put the questions together on the topic of dynamics of family relationships, and then we'll take questions from the crowd. And on that note, Rabbi Seif, Yehuda, Shirley, was there something I missed?
Thank you. First, I want to thank Yoel Weiss and everyone at the Acțion Foundation for this wonderful idea. I think it's great to reconnect with all the old chevra. I hope that the renewed emphasis on alumni activity will help strengthen the yeshiva for years to come. It's with great humility and no small degree of trepidation that I sit here to moderate a conversation between Mori Rabbi, Rav Aharon Lichtenstein, and Dr. Tovah Lichtenstein. The topic before us is the dynamics of family relationships. My immediate thought when Yoel first asked me to moderate the event was what an amazing opportunity it would be to learn firsthand about a family that we've all admired from afar. But how could I have the chutzpah to ask personal questions in this forum? And with this in mind, I apologize in advance on behalf of everyone here if any of our questions are too personal or too probing. By the standards of Rav Kahana and the Gemara of Brachos, it will be well above board. But our goals here are to model the ways of Talmidei Chachamim, to learn from our teachers, even as we leave the Kosli Yeshiva, and as we move to different stages in our lives, to really to learn in this way. So just to start at the beginning, and I asked this, I guess, with perhaps the highest degree of trepidation, we would love to hear a little bit about the early years of your relationship, of your courtship, perhaps how you met, maybe the early years of your marriage, just to speak to, fill us in a little about that.
Who's that question directed
It's to both of you.
I always let the Rosh Hashiva answer first. I think it's wrong that the Rosh Hashiva should answer first.
So fancy. Well, I guess there's several stages we discussed over here. One is the period of courtship, the other is the early years of marriage. These can hardly be taken as part of the package. Broadly speaking, there's progression and advance and development from one phase to the other. But fundamentally, the very nature of the character of them, this is also the way they're generally presented in the literary world. There's a significant difference. If there were no difference, no major difference, the meaning and the substance of what the act, the transition to marriage, the significance that would be reduced greatly if indeed one were to fail to distinguish between these two phases. The process of courtship is first and foremost the process of inquiry, of discovery, and relating to that which one discovers, at least in our circles. There are, as you well know, circles within our own world, the entire world, and in the more general world, particularly the Eastern world, not so much the Western world, where no probing, no searching, no discovery is intended, expected, or materializes, and simply whoever is empowered, authorized, and interested in making the decisions makes them. In our world, of course, very, very different. We generally emphasize, both from a theological point of view and from a general, be it humanistic point of view, the significance of decision as being in and of itself a maturing experience. Secondly, it's provided the basis for the course of action in a person's life, particularly with regard to major facets of it. It's almost impossible to find anything of more major significance than the decision to enter into marriage and the entry proper. And precisely for that reason, the justification, maybe that's not the correct word, but the need for a period of probing and discovery is very, very significant. Of course, it's not all probing and discovery. Probing and discovery makes it sound like an experiment, a scientific experiment. And of course, it's far from being solely that. It's not only discovering a person, but building and molding a relationship. And in our world, one does not want to plunge into the relationship without having a sound base. Some people are very happily married, even though they only go out for a couple of dates, a couple of months. Some people it's a question of a couple of years. But in either case, the fusion of probing and discovering, and the process of building that which one is discovering, and discovering that which one is building, is what I think the period of courtship is all about. I say again, in a more solid literary world, that's the way which it appears. Of course, if you read 16th, 17th century literature, it's all about Cupid with bows and arrows and all the other things which Shakespeare and others familiarized. But that's very remote from ourselves. As far as the probing, to a very great extent, the one searches, as Eliezer did Bishato, for values, for interests, for directions, for personality type, to which one has a certain relationship, presumably a positive one. But sometimes it's not a question of something which is similar to what I am, maybe it's different or different complementary. But in either case, the hope and the expectation is that having built on a world of common values, common interests, over and above the interpersonal and physical side of marriage, for people like ourselves who want to live to a very great extent on the basis of principles, priorities, moral and ethical directions, religious conviction, religious lifestyle, etc., etc. All of that is something to which one is attracted. It's not a sufficient condition, but likely a necessary one. And hopefully that's which comes to the fore once a person has crossed the threshold, crossed the Rubicon, entered into marriage. And there, those values which form the basis of the courtship, presumably form the basis of that which materializes the early years of marriage, when it's not the abstract formulation of hopes, expectations, but beyond that, the implementation within a very intense personal context, but within which issues of personality are significant side by side with questions of abstract values and priorities. So certainly, in one respect, I've said, I think these are two phases, very different. In other sense, there is hopefully a continuum between the stage of courtship, which is set the stage, and the phase of early marriage, where the stage having been set, you could approach to the actual construction and development of a relationship within a home.
Okay. Yehuda said the reason you wanted to know this was not chas v'sholem that you were nosy or interested, but you want to learn from this. Can you hear me now? Okay. Yehuda said the reason they asked these questions was because you wanted to learn from this. So you now are going to learn one thing, that opposites can live together happily for many, many, many years. And I think if you want to know about the courtship and the marriage, so I'll tell you about the courtship. I met my husband when I was 17. I married him when I was 24. It took me 7 years to realize that his depth, what you just heard now, his depth, his ability to analyze, his steadiness, those were all very good qualities. I also learned something else, which it's too bad I'm telling you because you're all, I think most all of you are married, that someone could be a wonderful husband and not the best date in the world. And there's a very big difference between being a good date and a good husband. And when you get married, you should pick someone that's a good husband. And people that are good dates, not necessarily are good husbands. And so I think that's what you can learn from that. The other thing you can learn about our early years in marriage was, in the early years of our marriage, we really organized our life around our children. I think our whole household, we had 4 small children that were born very close to one another, and our whole house was organized around taking care of those children. And the children didn't go off to a babysitter, and they were 6 weeks old, and they didn't go to a monyo. They didn't go any place till they were 3. And when they were 3, they went maybe for 2 hours, 3 times a week. Children didn't go to school and leave their parents home, whether the parents were home or not. And I consider those years, I really consider them magnificent years. They were magnificent years of giving to children, of organizing your life. Our house was a world of children. And I don't have enough words to tell about what a beautiful experience that is. I don't think people do that anymore. And I think it's a shame, because if you can learn 2 things from what I want to tell you is, one is that you can be very different and you don't have to agree. One of the triumphs of my early years of marriage was we went to YU, and my husband spoke about the Vietnam War. That's how old we are. And I didn't agree with one single word he said. And I was waiting for someone in the audience to say something, and no one did. So I raised my hand and I said, and our marriage was strong enough to, we don't agree with each other many times on many issues, and we respect each other very much as people. That's the first message I have. And the second message is that if you organize your life around your children to fill your children's life, to fill your children's needs, and needs don't mean that you give them all the time. It also means that you say no, and it means you set standards. But I think it's a wonderful experience, and anybody that does not do that is really missing out on something. Okay?
Thank you. Perhaps maybe just taking that last point about the children. I know, speaking for myself, there's often, there are conflicts that come up. Going to Mincha and Mariv with the minyan means that I leave my 3 kids at home with my wife for bedtime, or going to Shacharis in the morning means I don't put them on the bus, or being on the board of my son's school means that I'm taking time away from valuable time. And my wife as well, she's involved in organizing learning programs for the shul, and that means she doesn't have as much time to spend with the children. There are all these competing values, and especially given, frankly, the uptick in women's learning and women's professionalism and things that are valuable, and that I think those of us in this room value very, very highly. The role of the spouse in the marriage, and specifically the woman's role in the marriage. How do we balance those things? How did you balance those things? How did you balance the Shacharis in the morning versus getting the kids in the morning?
He davened at a late minyan. You think that's a joke, but it's really not. It really is not a joke. He davened at a late minyan so he could take the children to school first, and then he went to shul. All right, continue your question.
No, that's the question. I mean, I guess even how did you balance being a mother with your professional?
But you're asking me a question. But you see, you're asking me a question. I come from a different generation. And I don't think that's a fair question to ask me, nor a fair question to ask yourself. When my daughters say to me something about, babysitting it on my own and this and that, I say, don't ask me. I come from a generation. I don't think you have anything to learn from our generation, because I think your aspirations are different. I think the world in which you live is different. I don't think it would be right for me to answer that question. Kahuza. I really don't think so. But I think there has to be flexibility. And the one thing that I have real feelings about, that I really have to say something about, is I don't think professional success is the with-all and be-all of life. I think that success with your children, and no one has success with his children promised to him. Nobody has it. And I think some children we succeed with, and some children we succeed less with, and some children we don't succeed with, and there's no way to know it ahead of time. Sometimes children and parents just get on the wrong course, and they all mean well. Both the children mean well and the parents mean well, and they just get stuck someplace or other. But I think the major component in your life has to be the children, not the career. I think career is very important, I really do. But I think career turns into self-fulfillment. And it's not self-fulfillment that one needs to give to one's children. And everybody has to figure it out in his own marriage, in his own life, what he has to do, and what I did in my marriage, and what I did with my children. Believe me, you can't transpose it. You really can't transpose it. We're different people, we lived at different times. I think it would be wrong to transpose it. But I think the children have to be the center of the family life, and not the career. Not the career, only the children. But I tell you, I come from a different generation, and I don't think it would be right for me to say anything. I mean that very seriously.
Does Yeshiva have anything to speak about the balance, or how maybe you think that we can learn from the balance?
Well, there are a number of ways we could approach this issue. I've said on various occasions that we like to pride ourselves that we have the answer to everything. If only you know where to look, which Sfarim or which compilation of Sfarim. And if you just look at the right place and look up the right siman, press a button, out pops the answer. This is flattering to some people. Some people are not flattered, some people are horrified. I was people being either horrified or flattered, but that's simply not a true assessment. I've written about this. Some of the most critical issues in human life, some of the most fundamental relationships, do not have a clear statement in halacha as if one model what ought to be or what must be. And that relates at some level to the type of relationship between husband and a wife. You can have, within the limits of halacha, there are certain things which you must have. There must be mutual respect, etc., etc. But is it going to be a very intensive relationship, or is it going to be a more limited, confined one? How much interaction there is, etc. Or if we've got the parental relationship vis-a-vis children, are you going to be a father like Bismarck? Are you going to be a father who rolls on the rug and plays with his children, and lets his children poke fun at him, and laughs together with them at himself? I think either of those is entirely possible, entirely legitimate. And consequently, if you ask how do we, etc., don't expect a specific answer with numbers, with etc., etc. I think what we can bring to this is a question of perspective. And priorities viewed as perspective rather than as a technical formula. About 2 or 3 years ago, we had Dr. Rothenberg came to the yeshiva and he spoke for the Vichdus. And he was interviewing me, and one question he asked, one of the Bachim asked, about what I think is the most important thing I've done in my life. Without hesitation, without waiting, without probing, I said flatly, my family. And this respect, my wife and myself agree fully. And that's not necessarily translating into a halachic issue. I will tell you quite openly, quite honestly, in many, many days, when children were young, we talk about 4 children born in 4 years in a day. I very, very often did not daven b'tzibur. I daven home, I try to make the children Monday, Thursday, but they're also not always. And it was a question of priorities. If you have a home with young children, the options are not innumerable. One option is that you let the wife do all the work, and you take care of your priorities, your personal gratification, you're growing as a lam, you're growing as a Talmid Chacham, your profession, etc. The other option is that things just don't get done, and then you hope that the children just somehow develop as you would like them to develop on their own. I know Rosh Yeshiva Israel, and many who are leading Rosh Yeshivas in Europe who adopted that course. Some adopted it not out of conviction, but I'm despair. It's no secret, in the United States of America, in the 20s and the 30s, the leading Rabbanim, members of Advocacy Rabbanim, with long coats and long beards, and the children were not Shavir Shabbos. I'm not talking about that, but even assuming they are Shavir Shabbos, but to what extent have you developed their potential? Have you helped them grow and mold as individuals? As Shavir Torah, Eidei Torah, how much of that have you contributed to them? Between having the wife do all the work and having a lot of work not being done altogether, there's a third option, that's that you do some of the work. I remember one of my fellow Ramim at the yeshiva here. Well, he was a bit younger than I was, but not very much younger. And I told him one evening that I do not sit down to learn in the evening before 9:30 because I'm busy with the children. He nearly dropped. I don't know what he was surprised at, these are my priorities, or whether he was surprised that starting only 9:30 in the evening, he was still able to put together a good shir. But he couldn't imagine. His home was not built that way. To me, as to my wife, she said we're opposites, we were not opposites on this issue. This is a very clear sense. Now, part of it has to do with the background out of which we both came. Each was in different homes. But in the Brisker world, devotion to children, to growth and development and learning was fundamental. It was not evenly spread. Generation to generation, you had a priority given to one child and not to another child, which is a problem in its own right. But the sense that the overwhelming importance of giving to children was there. It's a topic which, I'll be honest, it's a little bit, I have to speak about it from time to time this year because these are my convictions. But at the same time, it's still painful for me to talk about it. That wasn't my pain. We had Baruch Hashem 6 children, and I recall vividly, when I was Shana night, I spoke at the yeshiva in the Sikha, which I gave at the beginning of Sasa Yeshiva. And I spoke then about Chana and Akana, etc. It's an old parsha. In the middle of the Sikha, said my eyelid upon a person who learned in our yeshiva, been married for 6 years and had no children. And I felt, what a terrible thing I'm doing, talking about this issue with such passion, and he's not in that situation. You know that the Shana night, the Bachim all come by and wish them all a good year. And there was a particular word to say to her, I let them linger a bit longer. This fellow came by, and I said to him, I beg forgiveness if I spoke as I did when I know where you stand. And he told me, from the bottom of my heart, I thank you. But it's painful. The more that you think it's an important part of life, the more you have to have empathy for people who want and don't always have. And then I hope if the people in that situation here, I'll be understood that there's genuine empathy, genuine striving, genuine hope. But in terms of our priorities, those are the priorities. Would this involve a significant sacrifice in terms of one's learning, for instance? Or, if you will, one's career. Do I imagine that if I'd spent less time with my children, I'd be much bigger on? No. So maybe it's not as much a sacrifice as you might imagine. I would have a greater range of knowledge. I would put in more time. But in terms of the qualities which, to we Briska, are so important. The ability to open a sugya, develop it, think conceptually. I don't think we're made less of this. And I say this, you mentioned also about women. I have two daughters, as you know. Both are deeply involved in chinuch. I spent a lot of time learning with my daughters too. I don't regret a single minute, not a single minute. And for my sons, I remember one night, I used to go a couple of evenings a week to live with the boys. And once I met one of the Rami over there, I said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "I can't learn with my son." "What? Such a busy man, you find time to learn with your sons?" I thought to myself, and I partly mumbled it to him, what could be more important for me to do than to learn with my sons? We have Harav Aharon as a model to follow. Harav Aharon was in one respect mechanech hadoyer, in another respect he was mechanech in his own home. So he had a favorite Yishmael, apparently didn't give him enough time. Or there were other problems involved over there. But we had a bit of Shalom Zocher, of the Bris, maybe part of the Bris, Rabbi Moshe, the Rav spoke, and he thought at the time that I had some tendencies for askonis and needed to be somewhat controlled. And he kept hammering home, Ki v'yitzchak yikoyel l'chazara. And I thought at the time, I think today, he was rushing through an open door. That was my feeling. That's what I got in my own home. And in this respect, the sky's the limit. It goes on for more, for better. But Baruch Hashem, Yitzhak, Ishmael, that we've had that. And that has been the priority. In this respect, we have the difference.
Are there gender roles that are important to keep in mind? Meaning, given all of that and the importance of fatherhood, the importance of motherhood, still even in contemporary society, we find that the mother takes more of the role, more of the load, more of the burden in parenting, freeing up more time. And is that something that is the proper model? Is that something that, or perhaps maybe once every other week, my wife should go to shul with the minyan, and I should stay home with the kids on Shabbos morning, or maybe there should be some sort of different, more equal balance.
If you ask about total equality, okay. We're talking about total identity, or total sameness. That I do not aspire to it, I don't push it. But there's a big difference between saying that there's some gender differential and saying that the mother should take care of all these matters and the father should simply neglect or rely upon what the mother is doing. Not long ago, our older daughter mentioned, she came home one day, she said she has to give me a compliment. What was the compliment? She was talking to one of her friends. A friend was shocked to learn that, if you heard, I used to go to all kinds of events, school nights, and report cards, all kinds of other business. And her father had never gone anywhere to anything. He was always busy only with his work, his profession. So my daughter was shocked to hear that the other girl's father had never gone. And she was shocked to hear that I did plenty of going and plenty of attending. She felt very good about it. It's not my business to give comparative grades or comparative stations. But if you ask me what I think ought to be, yes, I think that there's room for gender differentiation, which is part of a much broader question. But we're not by any means comparing gender differentiation with the total monopoly of one area to one gender, another area to another gender. I don't think that's healthy, particularly in the current generation when so many women have been raised and reared with certain aspirations, and where they themselves do not look with favor upon what they might regard as excessive gender differentiation. If someone's brought up with that, there are many families, particularly in the Haredi world, in which it's taken for granted that there's total differentiation. We knew someone, my wife knew him also, and knows him also. He, fine Talmid Chacham, and when Pesach rolled around, he invariably went to America. He lives in Yerushalayim. And his wife told him, go to America, you'll be able to sit and learn, don't waste your time over here in the kitchen. So if that's the way the wife feels, it's one thing. I would not agree with her. I think the Rabbi used to salt the fish on Fridays. This time his wife could salt the fish too if he wanted. My parents felt he wanted to pitch in. It was not just a question of kibbutz vayni for Shabbos. It's also a question of how the relationship would work out within the family. And there certainly needs to be a share. A larger share, we're going to get involved in the mathematics of it right now. But the sense of working together, building together, I think it's essential. It's essential for the interpersonal relationship between a husband and a wife. I think it's also essential for the relationship with the children. That's part of what the children need to see. The whole of life, as the relationship is constructed for us, the relationship could build the world as one big koil, which all the men just learn, all the women just go to work. He didn't do it that way. So he built a world within which we can learn, we should learn, and try to learn as much as we can, but within which the other things need to be done. And it's an issue with two plays, particularly a person who's close to home of Lamdas, of Talmid Chacham. I recall when Mary Rabbi lived in Washington Heights. I used to see him, he lived on the first floor. I used to see him bring out the garbage to the incinerator. I thought it was a wonderful thing. But he was saying yeshiva, at that time he was back in yeshiva, in another yeshiva, and the older bachim were there, were horrified. Where's Kavanah Torah? How could be Kavanah Torah? You bring out garbage? I said to one of them once, what's the alternative? His wife should do it. That's better, that's more Kavanah Torah. That's part of what a person needs to learn. A young child growing up should have a sense of life is integrated, life is whole, life is organic. And the focus of that wholeness, that integration, is within the home, how they see mutual respect, mutual sharing responsibility between the husband and the wife, between the mother and the father. It's part of the chidduch we want to give them. So indeed we have to learn with our children. I try to learn with my children. My wife also learned with my children, our children. But the education of the children is not all book learning. It's not always to hear in the course of a shir. What they see in the home, what they see within the context of the most intimate relationship, and the attempt to reach out, to build together, to love together. That's part of the chinuch as well.
I'm a little shocked by your question. I think that's a question of 30 years ago. I really don't understand. I don't understand your question. Your wife wants to go to shul, so find a way that she can go to shul. I think if you accept as a premise that a woman should go to shul, you accept the premise a woman should learn. You're accepting the premise that maybe a man has more halachic obligations. So you have to work with these three premises and see how you can organize your life. And I think there's first minyanim, and there are second minyanim, and there's hashkama minyan, and there's a late minyan. And between all those minyanim, both of you can go to shul every week. What's this? 1 week you'll go, 1 week she'll go. I think it's shocking, absolutely shocking. There's no reason why 1 week you don't get up at 6 o'clock and go to minyan. It wouldn't be the end of the world. Or 1 day a week she would get up at 6 o'clock and go to the minyan. You know, and how old are the children? You have to really understand all of that. I think there have to be an assumption that both of you have religious and spiritual needs, and both of these needs have to come to the fore. They need to be filled within the family, with an obligation to the family. And it's not that the husband is helping the wife. No, you both had a family. You both decided to have a family. You're both people. Now divide up the work between you. And I said, I'm not of your generation, but boy, I wouldn't let that happen. And I think that is absolutely. And, you know, and studies have shown that if you go to couples beforehand and you say, how will you raise your children? Sociological studies have shown that they're going to divide it equally, and then guess who does the work? I don't have to give you the answer. The woman does the work. So if the woman is the gatekeeper, so she chose that. But if the woman isn't the gatekeeper, but the husband gets up and says, goodbye, dear, I'm going to work, you know, I think that's wrong. I really mean the word wrong. And you both decided to have children. You both have spiritual and religious needs. Now divide them up in a way that each one of them fulfills their halachic obligations, and you fulfill your family obligations. It makes life much more difficult. It really makes life more difficult. But anything worth doing is difficult. And that is another issue. You know, people like things convenient. They want it the way they want it. They don't want to sacrifice for the other. And I think you really have to. In every marriage, one has to worry about the needs of the other. And if each one will worry about the needs of the others, then both of them will have their needs met. But if you're only worrying about your needs and thinking how you can help the other one a little bit, it's going to be bad. And so that's what I'm saying. I'm shocked by the question.
The question was solicited from a Bulgarian from 30 years ago.
Okay. Because all of you are at the 6 o'clock minyan.
So maybe speak a little more towards that idea of sacrifice. What does sacrifice mean in a marriage? What is maybe...
You tell me, how long have you been married? You know, why should I tell you? What does sacrifice mean in a marriage? Sacrifice means if you don't want to go to that lousy movie, and she does, so you'll go to that movie once. And then sacrifice means that if he wants to eat at 8 o'clock and he likes fish, and you want to eat at 7 o'clock and you like meat, so maybe you'll eat at 7:30, and maybe you'll make 2 courses, maybe you'll make this. Sacrifice means that your needs aren't first. That's what sacrifice means in a marriage. Somebody else's needs are first. And if everybody will think of the other person's needs first, then you'll get someplace. But I don't think that the person becomes the center of the marriage. I think the other person becomes the center. But if you have a partnership where each one makes the other the center, then things will come out good. But I think sacrifice is a word my father used a great deal. And sacrifice is not big things. Sacrifice is not big things. You know, only Avram Avinu was willing to make a big sacrifice. But I think that every one of us makes little sacrifices all the time. And the little sacrifice is that you didn't want to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning to go to minyan on Shabbos, but you went so your wife could go to the 8:30 minyan. That's not a sacrifice? Yes, it is, in a very little way. And I think and a sacrifice is that you were very tired and you wanted to sit and drink a cup of coffee and your kid cried and you left the cup of coffee and you went to help her with home lessons. I think that's also a sacrifice. I think life is full of little things that you do, you know, these little gifts that you give to people. And that's how I think a family runs. A family can't run that it's self-centered. No way. No way can a family run like that. And a family runs that if you're very tired and you want to go to bed, and your kid calls you, your adolescent kid calls you, and I got a flat tire, you get dressed and you say, oh, that's exactly what I wanted to do now, was to go out and pick you up. Once one of my children called me up, I was supposed to go on a tiyul. I had arranged a tiyul. Could you please come babysit for my child today, because this and this and this, and nobody else can take care of the child. I said, I have nothing that I'm doing today. I had a million things I was doing today. But I really had nothing that was as important as the one thing he wanted. And I think that happens all the time. And that's what my husband says when you would go to a school play. If I were to tell you how many hundreds of school plays I saw, and they were all like this, if you want to know the truth. And you would sit there, and when we lived in America, we had 4 children in 4 years, and they all went to the same school, and they all had the same ganyanet, and she put the same play on every Hanukkah, and every Purim, and every Tu B'Shvat. Can you imagine watching each one of these 4 years running? And you had to come every year and act like it was the first time you ever saw it. That's also a sacrifice. Okay? And it goes like that for the rest of your life. It goes like that for the rest of your life until you get so old, then maybe your children begin to sacrifice a little for you, but very little. Okay? I hope that answers your question, okay?
I think the point that my wife is making is that the element of sacrifice is not necessarily the specific sacrifice that you make. It's some degree of disappointment, some degree of deferral of satisfaction, of doing something onerous. That's the form that it takes on the ground. But the basic sacrifice, if you want to call it a sacrifice as such, is the readiness to share. And to see things not only from your perspective of your own interests, your own hopes, aspirations, but to realize that what marriage is all about, and this is the sense of a joint, of maintaining in one sense individual identity, individual aspirations. On the other hand, having a joint existence, a common existence, and from that flow certain practical conclusions. But the fundamental attitude, and fundamental commitment, that is by far, far more significant than the practical implications it may have in a certain case. To some extent, I think that one may relate to this, as Chazal said, we got the Korbanos. The Gemara at the end of the last Mishnah Menachos says that the term Reich and Koach is stated with regard to very major Korbanos, cattle, and minute Korbanos, some kind of votive offering, something which goes to the ground, etc. And all of them it says Reich and Koach. The point of that being, the Mishnah says, Echad ha'marbeh, echad ha'mamit, uvash chaveri bar hashamayim. Regardless of whether one gives more, one gives less, but what the attitude is. Now, of course, that doesn't mean, I tell Baruch all the time, the Gemara speaks about this, we've got the Talmud Torah as well. It doesn't mean that makes no difference when you learn a little bit, you learn a lot. Sure, it makes a difference. But the difference has to do with the extent to which you are related to your needs and to your possibility and your potential. And where, given your potential, your possibilities, you are doing maybe double what your neighbor is doing, maybe half of your neighbor is doing, it may be all identical because here you have at an interpersonal level, something that you do more, something that you do less. But the critical issue is that you're striving for the interpersonal relationship, the interpersonal love which binds you.
I think, although I have more questions to ask, I think it would be appropriate to perhaps solicit some audience participation now, since I want to get everybody here out of here at a reasonable hour, including the Lichtensteins who flew in this morning. So, should we just? Anybody any questions? Everybody, it's always hard to take that first one. Chaim promised you'd do the first one when no one raised their hand.
Do you think that parents can do too much for their children?
Oh, yes. I said to my grandchildren, they're going to ask questions, I'm going to answer yes and no, But I certainly think they can do too much. Children have to take responsibility for themselves. You should hear my granddaughter, who's a teacher in 6th grade, 7th grade, talking about how the parents are calling all the time. Why did my daughter get this mark? And why did she do this? And why did you do that? And why did the school do that? And why isn't the school doing this? A child should negotiate his own way. And a child has to take responsibility for doing his home lessons. And the school has to take responsibility to see that the child does his home lessons. And parents have to see the child takes responsibility in the home. And I really, truly think that if parents do too much for their children, they are not doing them a big favor. They are doing them less than a favor.
I agree with that fully. Sometimes you can stifle a person with giving too much, even giving too much love. The development of personality from ground zero has to do with the development of a moral self, an ethical self, and a creative self. To the extent that a parent impedes the development of responsibility and the conscious responsibility in a child, he or she is damaging, stifling potential growth, and that certainly can be very, very negative. But if the balance is to be struck properly, maybe it should not be by reducing one element, but rather increasing the other one. See to it that the element, what you give to the child is balanced with what you expect of him, demand of him or her, and then you attain a balance and still able to give a lot of love. Repeat the question.
That's a great question.
How does the relationship between the parent and the child change once the children become adults?
Did you hear the question? How did the parent-child relationship change once the children become adults?
It's a good question. But the answer to it differs from culture to culture. There are certain cultures which are very paternalistic. Even if a child is growing to maturity, the expectation, the demand is that the full weight of authority that the parent had when the child was a juvenile, who was an adolescent, that be sustained and maintained. Not only authority in terms of making decisions, but make it clear the whole tone is set by the parent, the whole thrust of everything that goes on set by the parent. There are other cultures in which there's clear recognition that at one time the child was a young infant, unable to express, unable to develop, and now, in terms of capacity, he is where you are, and maybe you beyond where you are. One envies all others except for his sons and his students. The implication of that is, if I read the text correctly, not a statement of sociological fact, or psychological fact. The implication of that is that he ought not have that kind of envy. He recognized the fact that indeed there was a stage at which the relationship was one kind, and now it's different. Chazal speak both with regard to a certain point, you absorb, you accept totally. Beyond a certain point, within the context of Seif fundamental commitment and perspective, but how you relate to the material, how you relate to each other, changes. At Weber Sufad Grossev got the Pasuk B'chukas. Afilu Avu B'noi Rabbi Talmido. They start with the city learning. They start a certain measure of tension and rivalry, or if you will, total acceptance of the reins all in the hands of the parent. By the time they finish, they end up with the difference that necessarily resolved, but with love and foundation of the relationship. If you want to see something even more radical in nature, look at the Medrash. It's last week's Parashat Kisisa. So the Medrash says it's analogous to the relationship between a student and a tutor. That when they first begin, the tutor puts everything to the hopper, so to do this, do that, do this assignment, do this. And gradually, more and more, the tutor steps into the background and the student takes over. That was said in the Medrash, not about a father and a son, or a father and a daughter. That was said about Moshe Rabbeinu and Moshe Rabbeinu. By the time the Moshe finished learning with Moshe Rabbeinu was now kaviyachol on a par. There are some never-halachic issues related to this question. Should a parent give cover to his son? His son is a bigger lam than he is. The question of Mahmoud Berger and his father. Mahmoud Berger learned better than his father. To what extent those roles be reversed? It certainly does not mean that you forget about the fact that one is a parent and one is not. But you have to learn to adjust that you are still the parent, but what the substantive meaning of that is on the ground in practical terms, it's not the same as when someone is 14. There has to be a readiness to listen, a readiness to accept, a readiness to concede, and that without any sense of for a moment that your respect is being jaded, somehow it's been reduced. There's the ability to have utter meaningful respect on the one hand, on the other hand, to give ground. Chassidus has some discussion with the Mitzvah Talmud Torah. The father should be teaching his son. Is that time limited? The discussion with the chinuch about the Mitzvah Milah, the Mitzvah B'din Ben, until what age is father up again? And one of the things that I mentioned over there in the chinuch is that the parent becomes a gadol to the bar mitzvah. That's a lifetime thing. Lifetime thing. The father is there to guide and direct, but the terms and the specifics, there's nowhere would it be stated that now the child should only be able to present his positions as if he were a little boy. It's a balance between the maturity of the child and there's also a certain process of maturity of the parent. Parents also need to mature.
The question was, how does parent-children relationship change when the children are adult? I don't think it changes when the children are adult. I think it has to be a process that starts from the day the child is born. And there's a catch in being a parent, because when you're a parent, when the child is very small, the child is totally physically and in every way dependent upon you. But as time goes on, the child becomes more independent. And then the parent has to begin to let go, and child needs to develop autonomy. And the autonomy starts when a child is 3 years old, and you say to the child, do you want to wear your red dress today, or you want to wear your blue dress today? That's autonomy. I mean, the autonomy is limited by the age of the child. By the time the child gets to be an adult, the child is autonomous. And the parent needs to let go, and the child is responsible for his life. And the parent has to realize that. But I think the parent has to always be there to give the child support as the child needs it. And if you talk about a medrash, there's a wonderful medrash that I saw about Yaakov and Shimon and Levi. He completely disapproved of what they did in Shechem, but the medrash said he went, and he stayed outside the gates of Shechem, because in case his kids got into bad trouble, he was going to be there to help him. And I think that is an amazing ability of a father to disapprove of what his children are doing and yet to be in the background, because if they get into trouble, he's going to have to help them. And I think children, no matter how old they are, they need support. Sometimes they need financial support. Sometimes they need psychological support. Sometimes they need literally help to help them run their houses, depending on what situation they're in. And I think that's all a parent has to do, is give the child support. The rest, the child is autonomous. And it's very, I think that that's from the parent has to do for the child, but I think a more interesting question is, what does the child, when he's adult, need to do for his parent? Because at the same time that he's becoming adult, his parents are aging. And I think you can disagree with your parents, and you can have issues with your parents that you haven't solved when you're adult. And lots of times people have issues with their parents, but I think having issues with your parents and respecting them are two different things. You have to learn, though, even though you have issues, you still can respect your parents. And a child has to learn when he's adult not to be an adolescent in relationship to his parent, but how to be an adult in relationship to his parent. And I think that's a very hard thing to do, because I think children of parents, sometimes because of the issues they have with them, remain adolescents. And they have to learn that whatever there was, as long as you know that your parent tried their best and did what they thought was your best, and they did their best, then a child has to learn how to be an adult in relationship to his parent. I think it's very hard for parents to treat children as adults, but I think it's no less hard for adult children to treat their parents as adults and not as adolescents, because sometimes you get stuck at the adolescent stage of your relationship to your parents, and it's not good. It's not good. One has to grow up and become an adult in relationship to one's parents.
If you're capable within the context of your own home, which is its own challenge, to set up certain standards or values that you believe in and that you try to impose in your own home in the context of your family, how should you or can you either control or educate your children to deal with standards that they may find in other people's homes that don't really fit what they know what they're doing in their own family?
I never found that different. I think it depends on how sure you are about yourself and how individualistic you are, and how much you're willing to say to your child. But I think you have to start saying that from a very early age. You can't start that at 15. But that's the way we do it in our family. And I don't care that they do that, but that's not what we do. And I find it very upsetting to see sometimes the kids are doing all kinds of things that their neighbors are doing. I remember when I was a little kid, I used to call up my mother and say, can I do this and this and this? All the kids are doing, you know? And no one was doing, but everybody was calling up their mother and saying, everybody is doing. And we used to stand there and call and tell, you know, and you really needed a mother said, I don't give a damn what the other people are doing. Those aren't our standards. But you have to be able to, you can't start that at 15. You have to start that when the kids are young and say, that's not what we do in our family. But I think in order to do that, you have to know very carefully where you're going to draw that line. I mean, I wouldn't draw it on everything, but on certain things I certainly would draw it. Where you're going to draw that line, you have to be not afraid that your child won't like you. You know, he'll be angry at you for a couple of days or a couple of hours, or I would suspect maybe a couple of minutes. But I think parents are very afraid of saying no to their children because they're afraid the children won't like them, or they'll be angry at them. Okay, they will be angry at them. But I said something once, I didn't know that I had said it, that it was such a great thing, but my son, Rav Moshe, always quotes it, so I think maybe it's a good thing. I once said after there was a fight among my children, and the next day they came back and they made up, and I said to them, all families fight. Only difference between good families and bad families is good families make up and forget about it, and bad families keep a grudge. But everybody fights. So your kids can get angry at you, and you can get angry at them, but you're going to forget about it in about 10 minutes, or maybe half an hour, maybe 1 hour, maybe 2 hours, maybe next day. But in order to set standards that other people don't have, you have to be willing to contain the child's anger and not be afraid of it. And I think many, many, many parents are afraid of containing their child's anger because they're afraid then they won't like them, then they'll lose them, then I don't know what. They're afraid of a million things because they also connect up to the way their parents contain their anger. But I think you have to be able to contain anger, and you have to know that your standards are good standards, because otherwise your kid's going to be swept away in the waves of everything that everybody else is doing, and I think that's not very good, because many of the things that are going out there you don't want for your kids. And I think it's very hard in the United States to do it, because I think some of the issues are really big issues. I think they're issues of kids wanting instant gratification, which I think is a terrible thing. I think it's a terrible thing. I think kids getting involved in living in a luxurious way. Every time I speak about this. They get everything they want. By the time they're 12, they're jaded. What do they have left to hope for? Everything they want, they've already gotten. They've already been on airplanes, they've been on trips, and they've been banjoing and jumping, and they've been skiing, and they've been to Europe, and they've been to Israel, and they've been on planes. They've been every place. What's left for them to look forward to? And I think one has to be very careful about that. And I love to tell the story. I really love to tell the story. It happened, we babysat for our grandchildren once, and we took them to Bear Mountain rowing. I don't know if I've told it to anybody here, but I'm going to tell it again because you could hear it again. We took them rowing. They didn't even want to go rowing, and they're not sophisticated children. They wanted to do something more exciting. And we said, no, we're going rowing. And we went rowing. And a Rebbe from Square Town came with a group of little children, and he took 2 children out with him at a time rowing. And I was sitting with the youngest child on the bank of the whatever it was more like a puddle than anything else where they were rowing. And my husband was out with the children rowing, and this little Chassidish boy from Square Town comes out after rowing in the boat for 10 minutes, comes out and says to me with an accent, because his language of speech was, his mother tongue was Yiddish, he says, "I'm the luckiest boy in the whole world." And I said to him, why? He said, because I went rowing in this boat. And I thought to myself, that is something that our kids have lost. They're not happy with that anymore. And I don't think that's a favor that we do to our children. We think we're doing them great favors, but believe me, we're not. We're not. And I think if you want to be different than everybody else, you have to be willing to do that. And to be sure of what you want for your child, and to set your standards, and to contain the fact that they might be angry. But then you have to be able to contain their anger, because believe me, it's not a bad thing. And you can't contain it if you know that that's what you want. I mean, just think, you can bring them up to be religious, so you can also bring them up to do other things. The world is not religious out there. The world is very irreligious. So you can also bring them up to have many other values of tzniut and of modesty and of family values, all kinds of things. But you have to really, really mean it, and really being able to contain it and to be sure about it.
God, these issues, many of these questions come up, and many of them come to me within the context of the yeshiva. I suppose you read these articles about people who are concerned about the children flipping out, flipping up, flipping down, and parents who are upset because the son comes back from Israel, and he's concerned all of a sudden about Zman Krishma, and the daughter will only wear long skirts, etc., etc. And some of them are anguish, some are not. I think that there are a number of points to be borne in mind. Number one, where there is some measure of deviation, your home is somebody else's home. First of all, which direction is the deviation? Less Yiras Shamayim, as the children perceive it, or you perceive it, or more Yiras Shamayim. Secondly, there's a concern relatively minor issues. If, for instance, if you're naged, like the Mechaber, most people like today, to have first Kiddush then to Yestadayim, and all of a sudden your child goes off to some Yekesh Yeshiva, and they have Yestadayim before Kiddush. That's an earth-shaking issue. It's not per se a reflection of which way the wind is blowing at him spiritually. That can be very different from other changes. Again, whether it's the right or the left, other changes which have to do with what fundamental construct of what is Vedeus, of his gut, personality. Thirdly, you have to ask yourself whether there is some element of difference. and you're upset. Why are you upset? Are you upset because you remember that you saw Shuv of Cooks about Shema Berim B'Servicha V'Atito Shlo Atimecha. Which Rav Kook thought you couldn't change Rav Asfadit v'Ashkenazit. If that was you worried about, the value of tradition, and there your home is a bastion of tradition, you're going to maintain it that way, you'll be darned if your child is going to deviate from tradition. I say the Tatik Gezot, the Tatik Gezot, the Tatik Gezot, and that's the way your child is going to do it too. Is that what's bothering you? Because the loss of tradition is a value. Traditional practice. And the people do it's a value. My father, Rasholem, used to lament the lack of uniformity in the killer. And he had at home, in our house, Seif, like Levi, 800 years of Minhagim in Würzburg in Germany. And he used to say to me, what do we have over here? Maybe barely 80 years, not 800 years. Is that what's bothering you? Or is it in some sense that you take offense personally? Your authority is being defined. It's a rebellion of sorts. And you're worried not about the rebellion against that particular phenomenon or that particular value of tradition, but it's sort of voce subliminally, somehow clash between you and your son, between you and your daughter. In one case, it's the Yetzer Tov which is concerned, and so, even his interests sometimes need to be sacrificed, and sometimes it's the Yetzer. You want to have the power and the authority, and power and authority for you in a whole bunch of religious, which the halachic committed, that means power and authority with regard to halachic issues. Any deviation from that, that's rebellion. And rebellions need to be subdued. All of these facts need to be considered with honesty, with candor. And with regard to all of them, you have to ask yourself, not only what is the source of this particular deviation, why does somebody else's home is better than your home? Many times the reason that it's better is no other reason the offense is done somebody else's home, but not your home. And there is some element of rebellion. What are you going to do about it? Is the answer to all rebellions be the minor, significant, at times impurely motivated? The answer is always the heavy-handed approach, shake it, on it. Is that going to help? Chazal say with regard to mitzvah techocher. What you were talking about, to some extent, that's an element of techocher. You want the guy who wants to direct the child. כשם שמצווה לומר הנשמע, כך מצווה שלא בדבר שלא נשמע. And if that is said by Chazal at a purely interpersonal level with you and your neighbor, or between one balabas and the context of a shul, Allah has come 1,000 times Allah has come when you're dealing with the relationship to your children. There too, you must know what's the davar nishma, which is worth saying, worth guiding, which should add direction, which should add value, which should add purpose, which should add meaning. And what is davar sheda nishma? Which should seem to fuel, suddenly you realize this scotch, what may be very positive desire on the part of your son, your daughter, to work out the religious identity. It's not the end of the world if you do certain things one way instead of the other way. There's people who immediately, some change in the home religiously, or which son or daughter wants to have, immediately it's delegitimization, etc., etc. First of all, maybe it is delegitimization. So is that the worst thing in the world? Believe me, the worst thing is the delegitimization. The worst thing is too much frumkeit. But really, it's not always delegitimization. It may be that if someone grows up in a kehillah, and when he's exposed to more intensive Teodei kehillah, suddenly it dawns upon him that he identifies psychologically, spiritually more with this new kehillah to which he's exposed than the kehillah in which he grew up. A parent will do himself a favor, a child a favor, if instead of going to the mat, if instead he accepts it, he internalizes it, and recognizes the fact that indeed a child can best grow at times by being a little different. But I say again, we're not talking about someone who totally rebels, but it's a mini rebellion. No. Many things we see in our children different from ourselves, and we can accept that, we can even value that, at times even encourage that, all depending on the dynamics of the relationship.
At least now we know who's good cop and who's bad cop. Well, I think with that, we should maybe Dav Marv, and thank you so much to the Lichtensteins for a phenomenal evening and staying up late on the night of your arrival. And thank you everybody for coming, and a great reunion night. Thank you.
Just in closing, thank you for coming, but we've dealt with issues which are not marginal, and not peripheral, not incidental. The questions you raised, leaving aside totally the personal biographical element for ourselves, these are issues which need to be given thought to, which have to do with the fundamental character of a home, of a family, of a basic relationship, one of the most basic relationships in human life, in human history. And it's essential for the healthy psychological development of a child and a family. It's essential for a fundamental spiritual development of a child and a family. And for a word of the Hashemayim, in its narrow sense, it's essential for that too. Talu v'tatzlichu.
Thank you very much. I also, again, want to thank the Lichtensteins and Rabbi Seif for his work and the program this evening. I know we promised there wouldn't be any solicitations, but I just wanted to ask one question and follow up to Shirley. Can a parent do too much for the children? So I want to know if donors can contribute too much to the institution, and I hope it's a no or no answer, Tovah.
No, they can never contribute enough.
Sounds good. But on that note, I just wanted to let everybody know and remind you there have been saved the dates card for the dinner, the Yeshiva's dinner this year in New York, May 24th, the Monday after Shavuot. Rabbi Sachs from England will be there. David and Faye Landis, our guests of honors. Rabbi Seth and Lieber Grauer is here, are being honored as well. And of course, the Rosh Yeshiva and other Ramim and Rebbeim from Gush will be here as well, and hope you can participate. And on that note, we will daven Ma'ariv. Thank you very much.